Captain Midnight.
DC movies have had it rough lately. After Justice League, I think even the most hardcore DC fans are having a hard time feeling optimistic. But there is one area where the company is still knocking it out of the park on screen, in the world of animated films. Sure, they're not always perfect, and their last movie was kind of a dip in quality, but for the most part, DC Animation has maintained an incredible legacy of high quality animation in the past few decades. And I'm happy to report that Gotham by Gaslight, finally hitting DVD and Blu-ray this month, lives up to that legacy. And it does it while taking some pretty big risks. This may be a weird, steampunk-influenced Batman wandering the streets of a fog-filled Gotham in the Victorian era, but it also understands the core of The Dark Knight in a way that few live-action films have. And just so you know, I will be keeping this review spoiler-free until the end, and then I'll let you know where to stop if you don't want to know the twists.
Whoever dehydrated those pirates could not have foreseen their accidental rehydration.
But I guess I should back up. For the uninitiated, Batman Gotham by Gaslight is based on a great graphic novel from the late 80s that follows young Bruce Wayne as he tries to track down Jack the Ripper. So yeah, it's pretty high concept stuff. And in the wrong hands, it could have been a deeply goofy disaster. But Gotham by Gaslight pulls it off not only with style, but with a surprising amount of substance too. I love that it plays the era completely straight, with minimal winking at the audience. The idea of Batman fighting Jack the Ripper may sound really funny, like dumb even, on paper, but it all comes down to execution, and like the graphic novel before it, Gotham by Gaslight really executes where it counts. The Gotham it creates is more than just a gimmick. It's a fairly fleshed out world with problems and concerns unique to this version of the city. I love the look too. While definitely leaning in on the Victorian London aesthetic we'd expect from a story featuring Jack the Ripper, it also plays up the old-timey Chicago look that Gotham has sometimes. The plot also revolves around an event very clearly based on the Chicago World Fair. This is pretty clever actually, because it means that not only does the film obviously draw from the history of Jack the Ripper, but also the history of America's most notorious killer in the 1800s, H.H. Holmes, who famously constructed a hotel in Chicago where he preyed on his victims around the same time as the 1893 Chicago Fair. But all that history stuff aside, seeing the foggy, dirty streets of Gotham is pretty great. And it gives the movie a distinct look that sets it apart from most of the past Batman animated work.
With magnetic hands and feet.
Upside down or standing tall. Batman, they stick to most any metal at all.
Then there's the way it reimagines classic Batman characters. It doesn't always work, like I'm not sold on what they did with Poison Ivy, an exotic dancer with very, very little to do in this version. That was kind of disappointing, but it's hardly the worst version of Poison Ivy ever. Actually, come to think of it, I really disliked what they did with her in the Arkham games too. Poison Ivy is great, and I like the way her character can be used to challenge Bruce Wayne's beliefs, but she's kind of gotten the short end of the stick in adaptations for whatever reason. And the Robins being a bunch of poor street urchins straight out of a Charles Dickens book was kind of corny. Other than that though, I think they made some pretty interesting and smart changes when taking these characters back in time. Harvey Dent is transformed into a shallow playboy, the kind of guy who will pretend to be your best buddy and is fun to hang out with, but probably won't have your back when it really matters. So, a less literal Two-Face. Chief Bullock is turned into a really grumpy, old-timey Irish cop, which is pretty great. But the real star here is Catwoman. Selina Kyle wasn't even in the original graphic novel, but she plays a huge role here, and I'm glad she does. As mentioned in an old video of mine about the Batman Telltale game, I'm a huge fan of Catwoman when she's written well, and she definitely is here. At her worst, she can be a one-dimensional villain tossing out bad pun after bad pun. But when the writers actually care, she's a much more morally ambiguous figure, who exists outside of the rich, isolated, high-class world of the Gotham elite. In Gotham by Gaslight, she rightfully suspects that the police are doing far less than they could about the Ripper killings because they're happening to poor women from the wrong side of the track, which mirrors what happened in the real Ripper case in London, and it also gives her character a pretty great arc. Then there's Batman himself. I'm a little hesitant when someone who isn't Kevin Conroy voices the Caped Crusader, which is, I admit, probably a little unfair on my part, but I think Bruce Greenwood does a pretty good job here. His Batman and his Bruce Wayne voices are very distinct. to the point where they feel like different characters. And I mean that in a good way. It's actually almost believable that no one would suspect Bruce of being Batman, because in costume he comes off like 30 years older. As Bruce Wayne, he pretends to be a nice but mostly naive rich kid. I think the steampunk motorcycle may have been pushing it a little too far, but it's a Batman story, that happens. Finally, I guess I should probably talk about the twist. Okay, there are spoilers ahead, so I'm gonna give everyone a few seconds to clear out and come back later when they've watched it. But know when I come back, there will be spoilers.
Who defends this city?
Batman and Robin.
Leading the ultimate airstrike, aerial combat Batman.
Are they gone? Okay, cool. So for anyone who's seen it or doesn't care about spoilers, I'll just say it. Commissioner Gordon is Jack the Ripper in this story, and it's great. Twists like this are what make Elseworld stories so fun. When most viewers watch Gotham by Gaslight, they'll just assume Jim is exactly who he presents himself as. After all, who would suspect friendly old James Gordon, who we've seen have Batman's back time and time again? But this James Gordon is not that. The First World War twisted his mind and gave him a really sick outlook on crime and justice. He especially hates women, and the reveal of what he's been doing to his wife is very disturbing, especially by the standards of a Batman animated film. The final battle at the fair looks great, and Scott Patterson, best known for playing Luke in Gilmore Girls, plays this creepy, murderous version of Gordon really well. In fact, I'll even forgive the movie for its slightly cornball ending based off of those final 20 minutes. DC Animation may not get it right every time, but their consistency is pretty staggering. And in this era of Affleck, Snyder, and Mother Boxes, it's great to have them around still creating, reminding everyone that the DC Universe can be really, really good, especially when examined from interesting angles. And Gotham by Gaslight might just be their greatest testament to that yet.